Mariah Carey, not merely a pop icon, but the woman who shaped the history of the genre with her own voice. The world once trembled to Hero, melted into Vision of Love, and crowned All I Want for Christmas Is You as the eternal anthem of winter. Yet few realized that every soaring note was lifted from a heart torn open again and again. Her voice did more than dominate vast stages. It became a refuge for millions of fractured hearts, an echo of the loneliness that dazzling lights deliberately overlook. She was crowned, celebrated, exalted for her talent. But behind that crown stood a woman eroded by two collapsed marriages that carved deep into her soul, and by ruthless health storms raging within her own body. Even today, at 56, that storm still tightens its grip, granting her no true moment of peace. So does glory still count as victory when the person behind it has shattered into pieces? And if her voice once held you when no one else could, subscribe to the channel and offer a tribute to her. The woman who has carried millions of hearts with her voice, even while standing in storms that refuse to let her go. Some lives are shattered into song before they are ever allowed to feel safe. For Mariah Carey, destiny did not arrive gently. It announced itself through trembling walls, broken windows, and a child who learned to breathe through music long before she learned how to be protected. Even her very name, taken from the haunting line, "They Call the Wind Maria," Broadway musical Paint Your Wagon, carried an inherent beauty that was both radiant and unsettling. Born on March 27, 1969, in Huntington, New York, Mariah entered a world already divided before she could even speak. The youngest of three in a family forever hovering on the brink of collapse. Her mother, Patricia Carey, was a former opera singer and vocal coach of Irish descent. A woman whose voice once filled concert halls but was now forced into small apartments and late-night performances simply to keep the lights on. Her father, Alfred Roy Carey, carried himself like a man who believed order could be built with his own hands. A quiet aeronautical engineer, proud in a restrained, almost private way, with African-American and Afro-Venezuelan blood running through his veins. He was not a loud man. He was a man who built, repaired, and tried to keep things standing. Yet in late 1960s America, his love for Patricia was treated not as a promise, but as a challenge. Patricia was turned away by her own family for marrying a black man, and that rejection bled into Huntington itself. Whispers turned to hostility, the family dog was poisoned, and their vehicle set ablaze, their windows shattered as if even the air had grown unsafe. On freezing nights when the electricity failed, Patricia placed a single candle beside the old piano, while little Mariah lay in the darkness, not yet able to name fear, but already breathing it in, learning far too early that beauty and pain could exist in the same breath. By 1972, when Mariah was only 3, the Careys' fragile marriage finally fractured beyond repair under the weight of constant tension and exhaustion. Arguments grew sharper, silences heavier, until one winter night when Alfred walked out for good, a door closing that echoed far deeper than any raised voice ever had. After the divorce, Mariah had little contact with her father. Her older sister Allison went to live with him, while Mariah and her brother Morgan remained with Patricia, who now carried the full burden of raising 3 children alone. The family drifted through a string of cramped apartments, never staying long enough to feel rooted. Some evenings the heat failed, and mother and daughter wrapped themselves in blankets, their breath visible in the freezing air. Dinner was often just cereal, yet Patricia would force a gentle smile through her exhaustion and whisper, "If we stop singing, the cold will win." At school, Mariah's mixed heritage made her a target. Some children called her too light, others too dark, and the message was cruelly consistent. She did not belong anywhere, so she built a place where she did. Even then, Mariah was not simply surviving. She was listening, absorbing, remembering, carrying every wound like an invisible map toward a future no one around her could yet imagine. In those dim, fragile rooms, Patricia's worn piano became Mariah's sanctuary. Barely 5 years old, she would mimic her mother's operatic runs from Verdi's Rigoletto in Italian. Not out of ambition, but instinct, as if music were the only language that could keep her whole. Throughout elementary school, she excelled in music and literature, beginning to write poetry and lyrics that already carried a weight far beyond her years. At Harborfields High School in Greenlawn, New York, where she would graduate in 1987, she trained her voice under her mother's guidance. Yet Patricia never forced her toward opera. Mariah would later say, "I respect opera deeply, but it was never my path." Still, on the path she chose was anything but easy. She was frequently absent from school because she was already recording demos, moving through the Long Island music scene with a quiet intensity that few teenagers possess. It was there that she began collaborating with musicians like Gavin Christopher and Ben Margulies, co-writing the very demo that would one day change her life. And in one of those cold, flickering apartments, a little girl singing toward a cracked window, her breath fogging the glass. The world could not yet see it, but a fire was already burning, a voice forged in hardship, tempered by loss, and destined to carry both the scars of her childhood and the power to lift millions. There are dreams that are not born under the glare of stage lights, but in cold, suffocating rooms where breath turns into mist, and hope has to learn how to cling in order to survive. And when Mariah Carey stepped into New York City in the late 1980s, she did not arrive as a future star, but as a young girl carrying an entire winter inside her chest. Barely out of high school, she set foot in Manhattan with a battered suitcase, notebooks filled with lyrics, cassette tapes so fragile they seemed ready to tear at any moment, and a quiet determination that even she had not yet realized was unbreakable. The city was dazzling, yet indifferent. It waited for no one, and for a slender girl with a voice larger than the world around her, New York did not open its doors. It tested her. To pay the rent, Mariah worked every kind of part-time job, cleaning, waiting tables, running errands, while still having to complete 500 hours at a beauty school, day after day balancing exhaustion and ambition. She moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Manhattan with 4 other female students as roommates. 5 lives squeezed into a cramped space. The sound of breathing, footsteps, and a city that never slept. At night, the room was lit by a single flickering bulb, the heater coughing through the darkness, cold winds seeping through cracked walls, and sometimes she had to sleep in 2 coats, her breath visible in the freezing air. Rent swallowed almost everything she earned, yet she still stepped outside every morning, clutching her worn demo tape, knocking on closed doors with polite smiles that felt hollow. I learned that a person can live on very little, but still has to find a way to stand upright, she would later remember. There were nights she walked home through the snow, the cold cutting so deep she could no longer tell tears from ice. Yet in the corner of the room stood a cheap keyboard where she wrote "Vision of Love, Vanishing and Love Takes Time," songs distilled from loneliness, deprivation, and an unwillingness to give up. During long, exhausting days drifting from one audition to another, Mariah took a job as a background singer for freestyle artist Brenda K. Starr, standing just outside the glow of the spotlight, pouring her voice into someone else's moment while her own name dissolved into darkness. Night after night, she sang beautifully and was forgotten just as quickly, learning that talent did not guarantee visibility, only endurance. In December 1988, while accompanying Starr to a party filled with music executives, she slipped her demo tape quietly into the hands of Tommy Mottola, head of Columbia Records. Not pleading, not performing, simply leaving behind the echo of a life that had been fighting to be heard. On his drive home, he played the tape once, then again, and finally told his driver to turn the car around immediately, as though his instincts refused to let that voice disappear back into the city that had already swallowed so much of her. But Mariah had already left. Mottola spent 2 relentless weeks searching for her through New York's labyrinth, chasing a sound that felt both fragile and unstoppable. When another record label later expressed interest, and a silent bidding war unfolded. Not over her reputation, but over the raw, undeniable force of her voice. Ultimately, Columbia signed Mariah, bringing in top producers such as Rick Wake, Narada Michael Walden, and Rhett Lawrence to shape her debut album. The label invested over $1 million to promote Mariah Carey, positioning her as their leading female artist. A monumental wager placed on the shoulders of a young woman who had once slept in the cold and learned to sing through it. On June 5, 1990, Mariah made her first major public appearance at the NBA Finals, standing under blinding lights to sing America the Beautiful. When the final whistle note soared through the arena, the crowd seemed to hold its breath. CBS's Pat O'Brien declared that the palace now has a queen. Her debut album then topped the U.S. Billboard 200 for 11 consecutive weeks. Yet behind that moment of triumph was still the same girl who had slept in two coats, walked through snow, and been told she wanted too much. Glory did not erase those cold nights. It merely cast light upon them. And that is what the audience could feel without being told, that a life worthy of admiration is always built upon winters the world never sees, where music is not just talent, but a means to survive, to rise, and ultimately, to shake an entire era. The girl who once wrote melodies by candlelight now stood among glass corridors and polished gold, the air cool against her skin, her shoulders held unnaturally still. She did not arrive dazzled. She arrived braced, jaw tight, breath measured. Years later, she would remember not thinking about success, but about staying upright, about whether her voice would finally land somewhere solid instead of slipping away. When she sang Vision of Love in that studio, the sound felt altered, not because her range had changed, but because it stopped vanishing into space. Her throat burned slightly on the final note. The room froze. Hands hovered mid-motion. Someone exhaled and said, almost without meaning to, "That's it." In that instant, cold apartments, hollow stomachs, nights spent swallowing fear instead of giving it a name, surged up her spine and ignited behind her ribs. When the song reached radio in the summer of 1990, it moved faster than her body ever had. Drivers humming at red lights, strangers leaning out of windows, DJs calling her the voice they hadn't realized they were missing. By year's end, Vision of Love stood at number one, and Mariah Carey, a young woman who had lived without margin, without shortcuts, without protection, crossed into a life that no longer permitted retreat. Not long after, the stage claimed her. Her first televised performance came without mercy. One spotlight, a black dress, nowhere to vanish. Seconds before air, her hands shook despite her effort to still them, the tremor climbing into her wrists. One thought looped. If this breaks, there is nowhere quiet left to recover. The camera closed in. Her heartbeat struck hard against her chest. Fear flashed, sharp and brief. She drew in a breath that caught halfway, closed her eyes, and released a note so exact it split the room open. Applause crashed over her. She smiled through tears, legs suddenly light, while another sensation cut through. The memory of a smaller body curled in a freezing room, humming softly just to stay warm, just to stay here. From that moment, acceleration replaced consent. Phones rang, schedules tightened. Attention multiplied until there was no empty space left. Before exhaustion hardened into habit, a cold clarity settled into her bones. The pain that once had stayed silent now spoke fluently, and her voice had become the only place she could stand without flinching. The dream was no longer chasing her. It had closed its grip. By the close of 1990, the girl who sang to survive had become unavoidable. Her debut album exploded past 15 million copies, earning 2 Grammys, including Best New Artist. The world bowed to a 5-octave phenomenon, while inside the glare the spotlight narrowed. What looked like freedom pressed down like obligation, bright, heavy, unyielding. Emotions followed in 1991, then Music Box in 1993, 28 million copies sealing her as the songbird supreme. With each triumph, the margin for error vanished. Perfection became baseline. Days stretched into 18-hour cycles. Sleep shattered, applause replaced oxygen. Some nights she faced thousands chanting her name, while something essential inside her stayed untouched. When the noise fade, she later said, what comes after can be louder than silence. Still, she continued, feet swollen, throat raw, spirit thinned, because stopping felt more dangerous than going on. Then warmth slipped through once. In 1994, she wrote All I Want for Christmas Is You in 15 minutes, a song that would outlive decades, born from a woman still negotiating how much joy her body could safely hold. Each December, the world turns its lights back on for her. her voice returning as celebration and reassurance. Proof that even lives shaped by relentless attention can create warmth, and that admiration always carries the imprint of everything the body endured to remain standing long enough to receive it. A strange thing happened when the world expected her to sparkle forever. Her body began bargaining with silence. In 2001, the $80 million Virgin Records deal arrived like a gilded monument to immortality, a public vow that she was untouchable. And then the earth quietly split beneath its foundation. Glitter, both the film and the album she had carried inside her for years, collided with an expectation that would not soften. Reviews hardened into cold metal, sales drifted away like light at dusk, and the label absorbed losses of more than $10 million before severing ties after a single release. The headlines that once lifted her to the heavens turned surgical and distant, dissecting her unraveling as if it were entertainment. When she could no longer stand upright beneath that glare, the industry offered a tidy, clinical word, the exhaustion, as though a label could sanitize a breaking heart. For the first time since she was 19, Mariah stopped singing and slipped out of stages, cameras, and the insatiable appetite of fame. Night became a private war zone. She would wake before dawn with her throat locked tight, listening to silence as if it were a final judgment, palms pressed flat against the sheets, afraid that even the faintest melody might drag every buried wound back into the room. She avoided the piano altogether, hands hovering, then withdrawing, because a single note felt powerful enough to reopen a life she had barely survived. What followed was not a comeback. It was a quiet reconstruction of her soul. In 2005, she returned to the studio without any theatrical posture of triumph, carrying only a steadiness forged from having already been shattered. Alongside the Neptunes, Kanye West, and her longtime collaborator, Jermaine Dupri, she shaped her 10th studio album, The Emancipation of Mimi, an album she described as very much a party record, yet beneath its shimmering surface lay years of endurance and solitude. When it arrived, it felt less like a fanfare and more like testimony. The album climbed to #1 in the United States, becoming her 5th chart topper and her first since Butterfly in 1997, embraced by critics who heard not just radiance, but control painfully reclaimed. Then came We Belong Together, a song that did not proclaim victory. It whispered, it remembered, it refused erasure. After a period when many had already written her off, the track redrew her place in music. He celebrated as both a return to form and the return of the voice. It rose to become her 16th #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and held that summit for 14 non-consecutive weeks, making it the second longest-running #1 in U.S. chart history after her own One Sweet Day. Billboard would later crown it Song of the Decade, and in the week of September 25, 2005, she made history again. The first woman to occupy both of the top 2 spots on the Hot 100, with We Belong Together at #1 and Shake It Off climbing to #2. Radio records collapsed, audiences swelled to unprecedented heights. Still, none of it sounded like conquest. It sounded like a soul refusing to fade. The numbers returned and stacked higher than ever, but they no longer claimed her. In 2012, she joined American Idol as a judge, guiding young voices carrying the same hunger she once knew too well. And in 2015, her Las Vegas residency, #1 to Infinity, drew millions and surpassed $30 million in revenue. With more than 200 million records sold and a fortune exceeding $350 million, she stood among the most successful artists in history. Yet the true metamorphosis lived in how she inhabited her life. She stopped singing to be validated. She sang because it was the only space where she could truly breathe. One night, after another sold-out show, she walked backstage alone while the crowd's roar still vibrated through the floor, slipped off her glittering heels, and met her own reflection. The same feet that once crossed freezing streets, now resting beneath crystal chandeliers. The lights softened, the applause ebbed away, and what remained was her voice, suspended like a prayer held in midair. For Mariah Carey, triumph was never the spotlight. It was the courage to keep singing when the noise fades and only the truth of yourself remains. Fame arrived like ownership disguised as applause, And before she noticed, parts of her life were no longer hers to touch. Long before permanence was ever promised, before marble halls and carefully ordered lives, Mariah Carey met Tommy Mottola in the late 1980s as a young woman still clutching demo tapes and belief with the same trembling hands. She was barely 20, newly discovered, raw from years of instability. He was twice her age, the formidable head of Columbia Records, a man whose approval could open every door or quietly lock them all. To her, he felt like shelter in an industry that punished the unprotected. To him, she was rare brilliance, a voice so pure it felt ordained. He helped make my dreams real, she would later say, measuring each word. But what followed was heavy. In those early years, happiness surged fast and intoxicating. Private vows, a sense of being chosen, the intoxicating belief that love and protection could exist without erasing the woman inside. What she didn't yet see was how quickly being chosen could turn into being kept. The first time a decision about her own work was made without her in the room, she told herself it was temporary. And that was how it began to last. For a while, the dream held, high enough that she stopped listening for the soft click of doors behind her. In June 1993, the dream reached its summit, dazzling enough to convince even her that it was real. Their wedding at St. Thomas Episcopal Church in New York unfolded beneath chandeliers and hundreds of white roses, cameras capturing every step as Mariah walked the aisle in a Vera Wang gown, shaking between joy and disbelief. Ma convinced she had finally found a home that could not disappear. After a childhood shaped by fracture and absence, permanence felt like a miracle she could finally touch. Outside, applause thundered. Inside, promises sounded like rescue. Then the air began to thin. Their Bedford, New York estate stood vast and immaculate, guarded and observed, a palace where silence traveled farther than laughter. Security circled the grounds, cameras traced the corridors, and perfection developed a sound of its own. Not a crash, but the steady hush of freedom narrowing. It was beautiful, she would later admit, but it felt like living inside a museum where my life was on display. She could command arenas yet could not step beyond the gate without clearance. Creative instincts tightened. Collaborations were gently refused when the safe formula was protected at all costs. Even her expressions seemed timed. The world still heard her voice everywhere, except in the rooms where her own life was decided. What had begun as shelter hardened into an invisible fence, and the woman who once sang to survive learned to sing as if every breath required approval. At night, the house breathed in a different way, slower, colder, and heavier. Mariah would stand by the window, palm pressed to cold glass, imagining air that belonged to no one else, telling herself this was devotion, that endurance was simply love's language, while something inside her slowly withdrew. She began writing in secrecy, looking in, butterfly, songs threaded with longing, freedom smuggled between notes, quiet acts of defiance dressed as melodies. Arguments thinned into silence, silence calcified into distance. She smiled for cameras, held his hand in public, and unraveled alone, pacing marble floors after midnight just to hear proof she still existed. I wasn't living, she would later understand. I was maintaining. In the winter of 1997, she left, without announcement, without spectacle, crossing the house one last time, setting her wedding ring on the piano beside a wilted rose, and taking only a coat, her notebook, and the courage she had been rationing for years. The divorce was finalized in 1998, clean and quiet, no public war. She did not ask for his fortune. She wanted only her name, her voice, and herself returned intact. Years later, Tommy would admit he had been overbearing, insisting he meant to protect her, and she accepted the words without rewriting the damage. From that marriage came no children, no shared home to divide, only the remains of a future once believed in, and the ache of two people who could not keep the same dream alive. And still, when she sings Butterfly today, a faint tremor passes through her voice. Not weakness, but memory. As if she is still whispering to the young woman she once was that the doors finally open and she is free to fly. In early 2008, amid the glare of studio lights and the noise of an industry that constantly demanded perfection, Mariah Carey unexpectedly found a different breath in her life. On the set of the music video for Bye Bye, a song already steeped in loss and farewell, she met Nick Cannon, and in those moments when the cameras briefly fell silent, something unguarded slipped through the shell that fame had forced her to wear. He teased her shoes. She laughed, startled by how unfamiliar the sound felt in her own chest. He was 27, open, kinetic, unafraid of proximity. She was 40, careful, calibrated, carrying scars she had stopped explaining. What disarmed her was not charm, but relief. He looked at her without asking her to perform the role the world loved. Their bond grew away from cameras, in hours without witnesses, calls that dissolved into mourning, confessions about broken childhoods, ambition, and the peculiar loneliness of being admired. She would later reflect that they found each other already cracked. He saw the woman before the armor. By the time the world noticed, they had already jumped. In April 2008, only months after meeting, they married Bahamian Beach, the horizon burning gold. For a brief interval, she felt named simply as Mariah. Life loosened, just enough to risk believing. Then the joy multiplied when, only months after the wedding, she discovered she was pregnant and believed for the first time in years that happiness might stay. Yet happiness, so newly born, was snatched away almost at once. Then her body answered with silence, and the pregnancy came only to vanish. Late in 2008, now alone under sterile lights, she heard the sentence that cleaved time. There was no heartbeat. Grief did not arrive loudly. It evacuated her. It felt like the room emptied before I did, she would later say. She told no one. Days folded inward, filled with whispered prayers and closed doors. What followed was endurance without spectators. Hormones veering, risk compounding, needles and pills. Waiting rooms that smelled of antiseptic and suspended hope. Every injection carried promise and dread in the same breath. Every bruise marked another refusal to surrender. Nights became ritual, the click of the syringe, the pause, the breath held afterward. Sleep fractured, courage was rationed. Sometimes she lay awake counting seconds between heartbeats, afraid of the quiet her body seemed to prefer. He stayed close, offering a future neither of them could guarantee. For nearly 2 years, her world contracted to patience. The woman who once filled arenas learned to measure bravery in smaller units. One morning survived, one possibility kept alive. I stopped asking for miracles, she admitted quietly. I just asked to keep going. When the shift finally came in the summer of 2010, 2 heartbeats pulsing on a screen, joy arrived braided with terror. At 41, the pregnancy demanded everything. Months confined to bed, blood sugar watched like a vigil, pressure climbing, exhaustion so total it felt perilous. Still at night, she sang softly into the dark. Lullabies meant as much to anchor herself as to reach the lives she had not yet held. I sang so I wouldn't disappear, she once recalled, as if melody were a form of survival. On April 30th, 2011, or their anniversary, twins Monroe and Moroccan entered the world. 2 cries ripping through the air like proof that silence had not won. She wept, calling it her truest award, her most honest applause, one that required no stage, no spotlight, no validation beyond breath itself. Yet pain does not vanish, it alters its shape. Between diapers and deadlines, lullabies and interviews, their lives began moving at different velocities. His world widened, travel, motion, endless orbit, while hers rooted itself deeper in the gravity of motherhood. After the children slept, the house settled into a familiar quiet, and the silence returned. Known now, not cruel, simply present. Not abandonment, recognition. Once again, she stood inside a life she had fought ferociously to build, understanding that even love, when stretched by admiration, momentum, and survival leaves marks no audience ever applauds, only ones the heart carries forward carefully, one breath at a time. The world kept calling it a love story, even as the house itself grew heavier to live inside. By 2013, what once felt merely fragile had stretched into distances shaped by fatigue, suspicion, and long silences that no one knew how to break. Rumors of jealousy and burnout hovered constantly, feeding on moments they no longer had the strength to protect. They tried everything that still sounded like hope. Therapy sessions that ended with polite nods and unanswered questions. Family trips carefully arranged around the children's smiles. Even renewing their vows again and again, 12 times across 6 years, as if repeating the words might restore what time had quietly taken. It wasn't the absence of love that defeated them, but pressure, schedules, and 2 lives accelerating in opposite directions. We wanted to make it work for the kids, she would later say, her voice measured, but we were sharing a roof while living completely separate days. He would remember lying awake at night, listening to the house settle, realizing that effort alone could not force 2 rhythms back into one. In 2014, after 6 years of holding something upright that no longer supported itself, they separated quietly. The divorce was finalized in 2016, 8 years after a sunset wedding that once felt endless. There was no spectacle, no public war, only exhaustion. 2 people stepping apart not because they stopped caring, but because staying any longer risked breaking everyone involved. After the marriage ends, the children become the sole priority. Custody of Monroe and Moroccan was arranged with deliberate care, on every decision leaning towards stability rather than winning. The children lived primarily with Mariah, while Nick remained present in their lives, showing up when it mattered, choosing consistency over absence. There were no courtroom battles, no public disputes. Neither asked for spousal support. She kept her homes, he kept his own earnings. The separation of assets was clean, almost quiet, as if both understood that peace was the only thing worth protecting intact. "I'll always love her," Nick would later say. "She gave me the greatest gifts of my life, my twins." Mariah never answered with resentment. "I wanted my children to grow up knowing love," she said softly, "even if it had to live in 2 houses." Some nights after the world finally slept, she would pause in their doorway, watch their chests rise and fall, and whisper, "Oh, we're still a family." Love hadn't disappeared. It had changed form. No longer romantic, but steady, deliberate, and enduring. When she looked back, Mariah no longer counted endings. She counted what stayed. "My children didn't rescue me," she once reflected. "They taught me how to breathe again." Nick Cannon echoed it in his own way. Being a father isn't about presence on paper. It's about being there when it's quiet. Success no longer arrived as noise or praise. It arrived as dawn. Some nights, the house dim and still, she would pause outside a bedroom door and listen to the steady rise and fall of 2 sleeping breaths. No spotlight, no witnesses, just proof that something endured. And in that silence, she understood it clearly. Her truest work was never a song or a stage, but the life she rebuilt stitch by stitch after the applause faded, learning that the deepest kind of survival never asked to be heard. The house had barely grown quiet after the separation when another current of grief began to gather beneath the surface of her life, slow and cold, as if loss were determined to prove that one fracture could always lead to another. Just as she was learning how to breathe after a marriage that had slipped from her hands, the past reached back for her through the figure of her father, Alfred Roy Carey, the man whose name she carried and whose emotional reserve quietly shaped her. A disciplined aeronautical engineer, he loved through action rather than words. A man who built structures in the sky, but kept a careful distance on the ground. When he left, Mariah was only 3, and what followed was not an open wound, but a long, aching absence. Phone calls that stopped just before warmth arrived. Visits that felt measured instead of intimate. A daughter and a father orbiting each other without ever fully touching. Fame widened that gap further, turning complexity into quiet emptiness. In 2002, as her career stood at its peak, cancer took him away, and by the time she reached his bedside, his body was fragile, his voice nearly gone, the air between them thick with everything they had never said. She later confessed that they felt like strangers who shared the same eyes, and his passing shattered her twice, first for losing him, and again for every unspoken sentence that never found its moment. That pain poured into her music, not as spectacle, but as confession, a place where she finally spoke not to be heard, but to be understood. Years later, grief returned without warning, and this time it did not knock. In the summer of 2024, over the span of a single brutal weekend, Mariah Carey lost both the woman who gave her a voice and the sister she had never stopped worrying about. Her mother, Patricia Carey, the opera singer who taught her how to breathe through fear and stand steady when everything shook, slipped away at 87. Within hours, Allison was gone too. Her sister, long battered by illness and addiction, a life lived in fragments and unfinished sentences. Two losses collided so close together, they felt less like events than a collapse, as if her past and her present had been erased in the same breath. Mariah later said it felt as though sound itself had vanished. With Allison, the pain was tangled, love stretched thin by distance, chaos, and years of helpless watching. With her mother, it was foundational, the loss of the one voice that shaped her own. Leaning close at Patricia's bedside, Mariah whispered a promise to keep singing, knowing that when her mother let go, a piece of her childhood went with her, quietly, completely, and beyond repair. What followed was not performance but absence. No statements, no public rituals, only rooms that felt emptied of sound. Her children found her at the piano, hands resting on the keys, as if music itself had stepped back. Each night, 2 candles burned, one for her mother, one for her sister, their names spoken softly, not to memorialize but to keep them close. When she finally played again, it was not for charts or crowds, but for memory, for the woman who taught her how to breathe through fear, for the sister she could not save, for the silence her father left behind. The notes were fragile, uneven, or human, and in that fragility lived the truth she now carried. Love does not vanish with loss. It changes shape, becoming a quieter rhythm that stays when everything else has gone still. Before loss ever took a name, the fracture had already begun. Long before grief arrived with final goodbyes, the hardest struggle was the one no one saw. In 2001, while the world still believed Mariah Carey was untouchable, her voice circling oceans, her name etched permanently into pop history, her private life was quietly losing its balance. Sleep unraveled. Nights bled into mornings without rest. Her hands shook with exhaustion. Her heart raced without warning. Some days came in violent surges, songs written at impossible speed, ideas colliding faster than her body could endure. Then came the collapses, abrupt mornings when standing felt impossible, when gravity itself seemed heavier. It felt like living inside extremes, she would later recall. Everything was blinding one moment, on empty the next. What the world later called resilience was, in truth, a long rehearsal for survival, one that had begun years before grief ever stepped fully into the room. Eventually, medicine named what chaos had been shaping all along. Bipolar II disorder. The diagnosis didn't bring relief. It brought fear. In an industry trained to worship perfection, exposure felt dangerous. So she learned how to divide herself. Under stage lights, she sparkled. Away from them, she unraveled. Each performance became an act of endurance rather than expression. Some nights ended with her collapsed backstage, pulse racing, thoughts spiraling beyond control. I didn't know where the act ended, and I began, she admitted later. Treatment softened the extremes but drained color from the world. She would look in the mirror and feel unfamiliar to herself. And at her lowest, she withdrew completely. Curtains closed, phone unanswered, the piano the only companion that demanded nothing. And still she wrote. Still she sang. Each note became a tether, each lyric a quiet insistence to stay. Recovery did not arrive dramatically. It arrived through repetition, adjusted medication, therapy, routines small enough to survive difficult days. She learned the warning signs, the sleepless climb, the low pull, and met them without punishment. Years later, in 2018, she chose visibility over concealment. After nearly 2 decades of silence, she spoke openly about her diagnosis. The disclosure did not weaken her standing. It widened it. Messages arrived from people fighting unseen battles, people who recognized themselves in her truth. For the first time, her voice healed without melody. Today, she still lives with the condition, the current still pulls, but she no longer disappears inside it. I'm not healed, she says quietly. I just learned how to stay. Peace for her is built the same way songs are, breath by breath, note by note. Because the greatest strength Mariah Carey ever possessed was never vocal range or acclaim. It was the decision, made repeatedly without witnesses, to remain present in a life that would have been easier to abandon. Today, at the age of 56, Mariah Carey occupies a level of wealth and permanence that reads less like indulgence and more like a universe she designed herself. Her net worth is most often estimated between $350 million, a span shaped not merely by decades of record sales and sold-out tours, but by the compounding force of ownership, catalog rights, streaming royalties, and the cultural inevitability of All I Want for Christmas Is You, a song that resurfaces every holiday season and is widely reported to generate millions of dollars annually. This fortune is rooted in structure rather than excess, in privacy and command rather than display. In New York, her expansive Tribeca penthouse, frequently cited as one of Manhattan's most singular celebrity residences, spreads across multiple levels marked by limestone floors, soaring ceilings, a private screening room, a dedicated music studio, and closets conceived like couture archives, where gowns are preserved almost as historical records. The space feels less like a home than a living chronicle, layered with photographs, awards, and carefully protected silence. Rooms designed not to impress, but to shield. While she has cycled through other notable properties over the years, from a French-inspired estate in Los Angeles to residences in Atlanta and the Bahamas, New York remains her emotional axis, a city whose scale, pressure, and brilliance reflect her own. That same philosophy extends beyond real estate into her material life. Her automotive choices, most often linked to marques such as Rolls-Royce, Bentley, and Mercedes-Maybach, signal comfort, discretion, and control rather than spectacle. Vehicles built to insulate rather than announce, to move through the world quietly rather than conquer it. Even here, luxury functions as a boundary, not a declaration. Nothing in her orbit suggests extravagance for its own sake. Everything points back to intention, to a life arranged so that what is most valuable, time, privacy, and breath, remains firmly her own. What ultimately defines her life now is not possession, but rhythm. Mariah Carey's days revolve around family, music, and deliberate self-care. She is closely present in the lives of her twins, Monroe and Moroccan, born in 2011, sharing everything from public moments to fiercely protected rituals away from view. Her co-parenting relationship with Nick Cannon is widely described as respectful and focused, built around stability rather than spectacle. Those closest to her speak of a mother who is playful yet vigilant, someone who understands that presence, not protection, is the most lasting gift she can offer. Physically and emotionally, Mariah moves with intention. Since publicly acknowledging her bipolar II diagnosis in 2018, she has framed treatment as self-respect, prioritizing therapy, medical care, rest, and vocal preservation. Her approach to wellness and beauty is disciplined rather than performative. Professional skincare, gentle conditioning, and careful management of a voice that has carried entire generations. Despite periodic speculation about her health, she continues to appear luminous and unmistakably herself, favoring couture silhouettes that affirm rather than disguise her presence. Friends note a shift over time, still exacting, still professional, but softer, steadier, no longer driven by the need to prove her worth. Artistically, Mariah remains engaged, not retired. Following the close of a major Las Vegas residency in 2025, she has continued to plan select performances and seasonal appearances while remaining linked to new music and screen projects. Her work now carries the gravity of legacy. Every appearance feels less like a comeback and more like a continuation. Equally enduring is her philanthropy. Through long-standing support of MusiCares, the World Food Program, and initiatives such as the Fresh Air Fund, she has quietly contributed millions toward children's welfare, food security, and arts education. Efforts that have earned recognition alongside her musical achievements. There is no public will, yet through her children, her catalog, and her giving, her legacy is already in motion. In the end, Mariah Carey's present is not a showcase of wealth, but a study in authorship over one's own life. She has lived through the glare of adoration, the fracture of heartbreak, the weight of illness, and the slow return of joy. What remains is not perfection, but poise, endurance refined into elegance. Her story suggests that true brilliance is not the absence of pain, but the resolve to ensure pain does not write the final chapter. And if her voice has ever carried you through a hard season, even once, stay close to stories like this, reflect on what strength really looks like, and let your support be more than a scroll. Like, subscribe, and keep honoring the artists who survived the storm long enough to sing on.